Good evening, everyone. Are we ready for the Liz Truss comeback show? So we'll go through a couple of questions first of all that will start here. One's asking, what do we think about the powers that be fast tracking warrants to allow energy companies to forcibly install prepayment meters? I don't really know at the moment. I've got an inkling quite a lot of MPs are not going to be in favour of this across the House, so we'll have to keep an eye on that one. But Brad's there saying, am I aware someone suggested on Max's stream yesterday that if Labour win the next election, the two of us should sing Things Can Only Get Better? I'm not allowed to sing. I'm really not allowed to sing. It's quite a stunningly bad singing voice. And the whole point of after the election, if the Conservatives are removed from power, will be to reduce the overall level of pain, not to just add whole new levels of pain, in all honesty. But, oh, Mike's saying, I couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, according to my own admissions. He's quite right, I probably mentioned it before. It really is very bad. In fact, I used to be, I think I must be the only person that ever got booed at a karaoke. The only thing I could end up doing was We Are the Champions in like a West Country accent. It sort of got me through. Drunks could just about handle it then. But anyway, will Sunak be forced to remove Hunt as Chancellor? No, not at all. Not a bit of it. What's happening with... I actually really don't know what's happening with Liz Truss. We will find out tomorrow. So what has happened is she's making this big grand comeback tomorrow. Now, I keep hearing various reports about what the aim is supposed to be. There is a long-term aim, clearly. They want to try and force Sunak to change his policies. Basically, Liz Truss is trying to rewrite her wiki page, I suppose. She wants to make out she's actually a secret genius, that she was dead right. And you can see already, see some of the right-wing commentators going, Liz Truss was correct, Liz Truss was right. And I cannot, I may tread on some toes here, I cannot look at the Conservative Party now and fail to see the Labour Party a couple of years ago. When Labour lost the last election, and what did Corbyn fans say? Jeremy Corbyn proved the point. Jeremy Corbyn was right. Every time, every little thing. He won the argument. Did he? Well, why did Labour get their worst ever result then? But the same thing's happening now with Liz Truss. Liz Truss was right. She identified the right problem. She got it right. And they'll blame, some of them blame Liz Truss. Some of them will happily admit that Liz Truss got it wrong in terms of how she presented it. And that's what she's going to try and say, presumably, that she made mistakes. We won't know exactly until we see the article. She's written an article for the Sunday Telegraph. I will inevitably be doing my thoughts on that tomorrow. She's also, I think, recorded like a podcast or something. She's not doing interviews, obviously. We know what she's like at interviews. So she's absolutely not doing interviews. But yeah, she's launching this big comeback. Now, I said a couple of weeks ago when it seemed to be in the offing that it's quite likely what they're doing is positioning themselves so that they can say to Sunak, look, this is wrong, you're getting this wrong, you're getting this wrong. Then when, lo and behold, they lose the election, look, we told you were getting it wrong, you wouldn't listen. Now, you've got to resign, can you go away, please? And then they say to the rest of the party, look, we were trying to explain what he needed to do, he just wouldn't listen. So basically, we need to take over the party again, and then we'll get elected, and then this unlit uplands will be just around the corner. And if that's what they want, if they want Liz Truss back as leader, fine by me. In fact, I would love it, absolutely love it, if what you had was after the next election, either Jacob Rees-Mogg or Liz Truss ending up on the ballot that party members vote for. Because I would say that's another easy win for Labour. In reality, they wouldn't make it till the next election. If the Tories actually made either Jacob Rees-Mogg or Liz Truss the leader after the next election, they wouldn't last until the following election. It would be like Ian Duncan Smith, only maybe worse. But run us through the likely scenarios that would remove the Tories from government this year again, please. Basically, Tory MPs, at least 40 to 50 of them have to vote for an election. The election happens automatically January 2025. You know, so the last election was mid-December. I forget the exact date, doesn't matter. It's mid-December roughly. So if the if Parliament or the government don't issue another general election before then automatically it kicks into place. So either Rishi Sunak has to make a request to the King that he dissolve Parliament, ready for a general election, or MPs have to vote just like they did in 2019. Only the law's slightly different now, but it's still the same process. They vote for a general election. Rishi Sunak does not want to call a general election this year because the economy is knackered. He wants to wait until we come out of recession so that he can start saying, look, I got inflation down, I've got the economy back into growth. That's all me, by the way. It totally wasn't going to happen regardless. It's all me, and if you stick with me, it will get even better. That's his plan for May, or well, some people are saying autumn 2024 even, to give it the max. I still think you'd want to steer clear of autumn 2024, because then you start to see all the winter, because the winter NHS crisis doesn't wait till winter these days. It's that bad. So the scenario has to be something that forces the Conservatives to trigger a general election. Ultimately, that it's one of two things. Either a mad band of 40 or 50 raving Tory MPs who, because they can't get rid of Rishi Sunak, says, right, we'll have a general election then. That is very unlikely. The other possibility is that they stop him governing, that the Conservatives cannot govern. They end up with their legislation, maybe even budgets, being blocked. So they then just say, well, look, we can't govern, we need a general election. The problem is that Tory MPs will be very reluctant to do that as well, because the reason the election will be being triggered is because the Conservative Party is in chaos, and that is not going to give voters confidence. So it is very, very unlikely that we get an election this year, but you cannot rule it out, because at the moment Conservative MPs are not paying careful attention to what needs to be done to win the election. It's not that it's hopeless, it's that they're just not doing. Like, what are people concerned about? Are they really concerned about boats? No. Are they really concerned about government debt? No. You know, what are they bothered about? Their cost of living, their income compared to outgoings. That's what people are bothered about right now. What are the government doing about that? Nothing. It's not even in Rishi Sunak's 5-point plan. I keep having to remember what his 5-point plan is. What is his 5-point plan? To halve inflation. Well, halving inflation, I mean, apart from the fact it's going to happen anyway, halving inflation means that the cost of living still goes up. Does that help me? Well, let's say I'm someone on a relatively low wage. I work full time on a relatively low wage in a part of the country where, you know, my mortgage has just gone up £200 or £300. Is halving inflation going to help me manage my bills more easily? No, it gets harder. So the halving inflation doesn't help. Reducing government debt, don't care. We're in a recession. In actual fact, you should not be reducing government debt, or national debt is what it really means, during a recession. That's when you should be borrowing to make sure you can maintain your public services. So that's not helping me. Oh God, what I keep forgetting because I get so annoyed by them. So let me look them up. I know the small boats one. I mean, goodness me, how does that help people? 5-point plan. People are probably saying it in the comments as well, but let's have a look here. Hang on. Can I just find a nice graphic of it? Oh, here we go. Right, halve inflation. So we've already gone through that. Doesn't actually help people because it still means that the cost of living is still going up. Unless you make that inflation negative, the cost is still going up. Grow the economy. Well, you're not growing the economy. And again, if it does, how does that help those people? It doesn't at all. Unless somehow that's going to mean they get more pay. Why isn't one of his 5-point plans to increase people's pay? Reduce debt, he means national debt. Again, like I just said, doesn't matter. NHS waiting times. All he's going to do there is wait for it to be summer, when the problem will ease a little bit. But then come next winter, it'll go back up again. And how's that help when he wants the election to be in 2024? So that means we have another NHS winter crisis. So what's going to happen is, in summer, he's going to say, hey, we're starting to make headway on the NHS waiting times. But then it'll get to winter, it'll get way worse again. So then when it gets to the following summer and he's trying to get ready for a general election in autumn, Labour will say, he's crowing about the waiting times. Don't you remember last summer, 2023, when he was saying the same thing and then they went back up in winter? Because do you know what? They go up in winter. He hasn't actually reduced them at all. So that's a non-starter. And stop the boats. Bloody stupid. Absolutely stupid. You know, none of these things address the concerns that people have. And that is why they're going to lose. They're not just going to lose because they've been in power for 13 years and people are a little bit sick of them. They're not just going to lose because they brought in Brexit, which doesn't seem to be going at all well. They're not just going to lose because they're fighting each other all the time. They're going to lose because not one single policy that they are pushing is designed to appeal to voters. Whereas you look at Labour and it's the opposite. You know, Labour are getting stick for some of their policies because it's like, well, that's not really the best solution. No, it's not. But it is the policy that is designed to get them elected. Should we stop the yachts? Thinking particularly of Mount yachts. Unfortunately, that's not in British jurisdiction, is it? But yes. The cost of living still consumes a disproportionate fraction of the income of the poor and middle class. Someone was mentioning something recently as well, which needs bearing in mind. I mean, I did a video based on the Shell profits thing about the inherent unfairness of the tax system we have, and lots of other countries. But someone wrote a piece in The Guardian, which is also on the money, pardon the expression, pointing out, you know, there's a lot of this thing about Nadim Zahawi and the fact that, you know, he tried to get out of paying his taxes. But this person writing this article was saying, why isn't there a lot of discussion about the fact that Nadim Zahawi failed to declare £27 million worth of earnings, which apparently now that HMRC know about it, means that he has to pay about £3.2 million in tax. £3.2 million in tax on £27 million in earnings is a significant reduction. In fact, shall we have a look how much of a reduction it is? Because he's not paying income tax on it. That £3.2 million of tax is not income tax. It's capital gains tax, because when you're really wealthy, you get to choose the lower tax bracket. It's all right saying, oh, well, you pay 45% income tax above a certain threshold. No, you don't. Not if you're rich enough, you don't. If I were to put in £27 million into granted, I'm not going to put it in the year it was, I'll put it for this year. According to this, you should be paying over £12.5 million of that in tax. Nadim Zahawi is paying £3.2 million. Literal one rule, yeah. If you're rich enough, if you're making enough money, you get to opt, instead of paying income tax, I don't even know how this works, instead of paying income tax, to go, oh, well, it's actually such a lot of money, I should pay capital gains tax, and that's not very much at all. But anyway, so, you know, so, and you think about that, so that means there'll be lots of people who are declaring their income properly. People with massive incomes And they're declaring it all above board. They're not trying to get out paying the taxes, but they're still not paying that much tax. And that's not even really tax avoidance, is it? That's just picking which taxation you would like. How do we find out all the Tories offshore jiggery pokery? Basically, someone has to, it's a bit like the Panama Papers. Someone has to just basically get it to the media. It shouldn't exist. Things like this should not exist. And part of the reason why it shouldn't exist is because the public aren't aware of it. You know, if most of the public realise that if you make enough, because people just think to themselves, oh, above a certain, you know, up to whatever it is, 12,500, you pay no income tax. Up to whatever it is, you pay 20%, then 40%, then 45% above the certain amount. And you just think, okay, so someone paying several £1 million must be paying this like 45%. No. How do the media not use that as a talking piece? Well, see, that is the thing about the British mainstream media, isn't it? It does not seem to be there to shine a spotlight on Tory governments. It does on Labour governments. Oh, don't worry, when Labour in power, it'll be amazing. All of a sudden, we'll have a media that's holding the government to account. Oh, you've never seen anything like it. And the last time that Labour in power. Oh, yeah, the BBC will be asking all the right questions then, don't you worry. It'll be like we've got a new media all of a sudden. The Tories want to reduce the national debt, which they've increased since 2010. Yes, increased a lot since 2010. You know, I mean, more recently, you can understand increasing the national debt during the pandemic. Any government should do that. But up until that, when they didn't have any issue to deal with, they didn't have any, you know, global problem, they had no recession to deal with, and yet they still piled on the national debt. Paradise Papers, did I mean? Sorry. Blocking budgets sounds like what happens in the sclerotic division of power between the three branches of constitutional government of the USA. Yeah, again, the US system has problems as well. In fact, they literally will block it, and it's like as a matter of course. It happens so often, doesn't it? It doesn't really happen in this country. I mean, what I will say, there are some aspects, if you compare the two like major first past the post systems of advanced countries, you know, the American and Britain, the US has certain checks and balances which are better than ours. I mean, you know, I was saying recently in another stream, and it's really true. Like in America, at least, because it's a federal country, you have you have state legislatures, so states have certain powers, so there are balances of power against the executive, the national executive. Whereas the problem we have in the UK is that the UK is a federal country without the federal infrastructure. You know, that's why the UK is constantly under threat from breaking up, because we don't have the infrastructure that pays attention to the fact that really the UK isn't a homogenous country. You've got Scotland and you've got Wales and Northern Ireland, but you haven't even just got England. You've got the north of England, you've got the Midlands, you've got the southwest, the southeast and London. And they're all completely distinct and all got their own different needs. And yet when the Conservatives are in power, the focus is entirely on London and the southeast. London, because that is the black hole that sucks all investment into it, and the southeast because that's where the Tories live. And you know, when Labour in power, there are attempts to try and rebalance it all, but it's all fairly vague, which is why there's people not wanting to be hopeful, because I think bitter experience stops people. But Starmer's push with this paper that Gordon Brown produced, which sounds like real reform, people are wondering, is this the thing that finally, you know, makes the UK work? Can't help wondering if Zahawi managed to change the investigation from evasion to avoidance when he was Chancellor. Well, no, it's not avoidance, because if it were avoidance, he wouldn't have been fined. This was sort of the point that the HMRC boss skirted around. He said, he didn't specifically say that Zahawi broke the law, which is evasion. What he did say, however, was that you do not get fined for an innocent mistake. Well, if it's not an innocent mistake, and he talked about legislation as well, this is prescribed in the legislation. So what's happened is Zahawi has been fined as a result of legislation. Well, when do you get fined as a result of legislation without breaking the law? You don't, do you? Legislation provides penalties for when people break the law. So what has happened here is Zahawi has broken the law. It's maybe just considered by the National Crime Agency that it wouldn't be in the public's interest to prosecute him for a criminal offence. It may not just be corruption. It may just be they just think it would be too difficult to prove in court, because that sort of thing happens. Just because it's a bit suspicious that the decision was made while he was Chancellor doesn't mean that it's not the decision they would have come to anyway. But as a father of 2 young children, I'm very worried about school funding. Energy and gas costs for schools have rocketed, yes, from £26,000 a year to £89,000 with a cap. What happens when the price cap goes? Well, exactly. I mean, as I'll tell you what, the last college I worked at full time, I worked there until the end of 2019. And sixth form colleges really did get stiffed for funding. I mean, if you think it's bad in schools, bear in mind, schools had a lot more generous funding than colleges, particularly sixth form colleges. The government don't like sixth form colleges because they're a very effective provider of post-16 education. And in this particular college, the money was very, very tight. So much so that very often the heating was not really on much in winter, except when it came to like the open evenings. Oh, if parents were coming around, then the heating was on. But a lot of the time the heating was not on. And I think back now to what that must be like now with the massively increased cost of gas and electricity, because, you know, their fortunes will have gotten worse, really. Not sure how they're going. The best take on the UK and its long-term situation I've ever read is from the best-selling author James Hawes. The shortest issue of England, blah, blah, blah. They told HMRC to use certain language. Who's they? Sorry. We're built on convention, long lost to time. We're desperately in need of full-scale change. The convention changes all the time. I mean, one of the main advantages of not having a fixed codified constitution is it can change quite quickly and easily. You know, it's very adaptable. When do I think that Sunak will file his tax returns? Well, he'll have filed them already. I think you mean publish, yeah? He promised to do this before the end of last year. Is he waiting for a bad news day before sneaking it out? Well, as I said, I mentioned it in a video. I really don't know. I don't know why he promised to do it. I mean, it's what, you know, if you're trying to say, look, I'm going to govern with integrity and accountability, it's a good PR move. Say, look, I've got nothing to hide. Yes, I'm incredibly wealthy, but I've got nothing to hide. I declare my income all legally and above board, and I pay my taxes on time, and I'm quite happy to publish my tax returns as an act of faith. That's great PR. But he didn't have to do it. He could have just said, no, it's a private matter, but I do pay all my taxes. I've never been fined by HMRC. I've never even been charged so much as £100 fine for putting my tax return in late. You know, it's always been done properly. He could have just said that. But he hasn't. He's offered to publish them, and he hasn't published them. And the only reason that he's not looking a bit suspicious over this is because it's in the top 100 things of things to criticise Sunak or the Conservatives for. That would not even be in the top 100. Spot market price for gas has plummeted, yet consumer and business bills are still very high. 3 times that of the continent have been ripped right off. I mean, bear in mind, when the price of gas comes down doesn't mean the price of electricity comes down, because they've had to buy the gas in and store it at the higher price. But there's no reason to suppose that they will reduce the price even when they're buying in the cheaper stuff. Because the thing is, really, it's one thing with the oil companies making record profits, because the government should just tax that. But the energy companies should not have been making more profit at all. They should not have been at best, at absolute best, they should have been maintaining the profits they were making. Insulating homes saves more than building. More power stations, cheaper. They could even hand out contracts to donors. Yeah, there was a funny thing about that. So, I mean, obviously, Labour were going big on that when they were last in power, and then it was just instantly stopped when the Conservatives came into power. And I saw an article a few weeks ago, and it's such a stupid article. What it was saying is, oh, there's this analysis that shows that when people insulate their homes, although there's a short-term benefit, it ends up that they don't save on energy. And then he thinks, oh, so how does that work? And what it turns out in this article, what it's saying is, because then what happens is people build extensions or things like that, conservatories, and then they're paying to heat that. And you're thinking, so it's not that the insulation isn't saving the money, it's that they're extending the size of their house and increasing the amount, the number of rooms they need to heat. That's what's making it. So the insulation is still saving them. If they built the conservatory and never insulated the house, their bills would go up even more, wouldn't they? Stupid bloody thing to say. But insulation, you know, any measures that reduce the amount of energy you need to heat a home is got to be better than just measures to purely make it cheaper to do so. Particularly when we get so much of our energy from fossil fuels, albeit cleaner fossil fuels than we used to get it from. Rishi Sunak squirmed when asked about wealth. They always will. The problem is that Rishi Sunak, like any leader, any political leader, doesn't matter, any member of the government, has to claim that they are prioritising the needs. It's this idea of that government should provide a safety net below which nobody can fall, but above which everyone can rise. That's the idea. And Conservatives, as much as Labour, have that outlook, or at least they say they do. So what they have to do is to make sure that they can show that they are sensitive to the needs of those who are most vulnerable in society. Now, this is a problem when you are very far from a vulnerable member of society yourself, because then it's like, right, you have got zero experience of living like someone who's worried about how to pay the bills. So how on earth do we know you're making the right decisions? Now, it is possible, of course. We don't expect effective leaders to have come from a life of poverty. They could just be people who've properly researched it and read about it to make sure they understand the issues. But Rishi Sunak hasn't done that either. Can't build a conservatory in a council flat. No, it is a little bit tricky. Although in a block of flats, in theory, it should be a little bit easier because you're surrounded by other people who are like heating their flat and so on. So especially if you're in the middle of it all, it shouldn't be as bad then, but the block itself still needs insulating. A conservatory without windows would save them even more energy. Yes, well, I mean, we've got a conservatory, it's basically all windows. I put like blinds there to try and, I mean, that's where I was. So our heating bills has come down because I moved from the conservatory into here. But, you know, at some point we may replace it with one. And when we do replace it, it will not be replaced with another conservatory with lots of glass everywhere. It will be walls with our window. Housing regs will have to shift with climate change. I mean, they sort of are to an extent. I mean, my partner works for a firm, a large company that makes materials for the construction industry, bricks, tiles, and so on. And they're gearing up for solar at the moment because effectively the regulations have changed and changed again. But effectively for new builds, there are different ways of complying with the new regulations, but by far the easiest is to install solar. So there's a big drive for that at the moment. But why the drive ever stopped 10 years ago is absolutely ridiculous. See, it doesn't even make sense for Conservatives to have stopped our expansion of renewable energy. You know, people go, oh, it's not always sunny. Okay, so sometimes it is. What bloody good is it if the sun is shining on your roof and there's no solar panel to collect it? You know, why not chip away at the total amount of energy we're using? Did I see Sunak's 100-day celebration post, which he just listed those 5 aims again? Literally had nothing to point that his government had actually done. No, well, I mean, it's one of these things. His government couldn't actually have done anything tangible in this time other than to have explained to people what he was going to do in a way that gave them confidence. But yeah, these 5-point plans. I've just seen a 10-point plan here when I was looking it up. That's in the Sun. I think that's just the Sun making it up. Let me have a look, because there was a 10-point plan. Oh, this was during the leadership contest. So this is what he said in summer. So he's whittled it down from a 10-point plan to a 5-point plan. So here was his 10-point plan, although this is defunct, this is gone. Rebuilding our economy could mean anything. Scrapping VAT on energy bills, well, that's specific, he hasn't done that. Cutting NHS backlogs, he hasn't done that. Or even put anything in place to cause it. Delivering on Brexit, that could mean anything. Tackling illegal immigration, again, not what he means. Clamping down on crime, well, does that mean we're going to get more police? No? Okay. Transforming education into what? Strengthening the union. Good joke. Protecting our green belt. In other words, making it harder to build new houses where Tories live. Winning the next general election. Nice one. Cruel to have the pensioner downstairs in that cycle so long. Well, I may actually have to get an exercise bike myself at some point. What happened to the garden office? I've never had a garden office. I have a garden studio. So that's where I record. That's all it is. It's so that I can record with some, away from the noises that may occasionally happen somewhere, with some reasonable soundproofing. That's actually not too bad to keep warm. I sometimes when it's really cold have to put a little blast of the heater on an hour or two before I record, but a small heater. It retains its heat reasonably well. But no, I don't actually work in there. Because, well, apart from anything else, if there was any thoughts of working in there, which there never would have been, because I wouldn't hear the door if it was going, if I was in on my own. The internet, I couldn't get a decent internet connection into there. Small wind generator in every house, cheap, and we're an island nation. I mean, certainly we need to, when ironically, round about the time when the Tories came into power, I was teaching environmental science, and a particular unit within it was looking at the way we generate electricity in this country. And as I say, it was a unit that I had to change my teaching material. You always change them anyway, a little bit. You tweak them for your class. But I had to change them wholesale from year to year because the Conservatives were, because a part of teaching it would be talking about where the various government incentives are, tax breaks and so on. So the numbers kept changing. year on year. But part of it was also looking at the effectiveness of large and small scale, and you need both. You know, you need to chip away instead of just thinking, oh, a little wind turbine here or there is not going to do anything. Yes, it is, especially when you've got a million of them around the country. Do I think there should be restrictions on wood burners? Very good at heating the home, saves on central heating costs. So why would I want restrictions? I don't really know anything about like wood burners, pros or cons. I've never really read anything about them. But if they're good at heating the house, see, all I know is I like a real fire, but houses don't have them, really, or not many. Only fairly wealthy people can really have something like that. I would love it. My partner, not so much. One can only hope their manifesto is just as uninspiring. Oh my goodness. Their manifesto is going to be quite something, isn't it? It is going to be incredibly vague. Because, right, so Rishi Sunak's plan at the moment is to try and keep all these various factions within the Tory party sort of in line, right? Which means that in his mind, he gets through this year. And then if he gets through this year, there's no reason why he can't get through next year right to the election. Because, you know, if there are any groups inside the parliamentary party that want to bring him down, it's this year. They've got two main opportunities, really. The first is the local elections, you know, but they may just hamstring him there rather than go for the kill. The easiest way is when he's been Prime Minister for, or never mind Prime Minister, but Tory leader for a year, all of a sudden the party rules say that if 15% of Tory MPs write a letter to the 1922 committee president, Sir Graham Brady, saying that they have lost confidence in Rishi Sunak, then there will be a confidence vote held. And he will win it, in all probability. I mean, he's in dead trouble if he doesn't. But he's probably going to win it. But if it's a bit like with Boris Johnson, if he wins it, say, 60-40, that's not very good. You know, that is not very good at all. That will fatally weaken him. So those are their real chances. But if he gets through this year, let's say, and goes into next year, and then is there at the general election, so he's going to have to write a manifesto that, again, all of these various factions can get behind. It will be quite something. Sunak's latest to judge him after 1,000 days, not 100, has to be a general election within 700. Yes. I mean, I don't mind if he wants to be judged after 1,000 days, because that will include about a year worth of Labour government. You know, and if the Labour government can suddenly manage improvements that he said were impossible, well, that'll be quite a good time to judge him, maybe. Oh, emissions are outlawing wood burners in many cities, Scotland at least. See, I mean, well, that's the thing, you see, I don't know. You can see how, if lots of people have, if they're, because there's no filters or anything like that. You've got no electrostatic smoke precipitators in your flue. So you can sort of, you can sort of see that. It's a bit of a shame. I do like a real fire. Tidal wind and wave ideal. Yes, I mean, we are a very windy island, basically. Our capacity to generate lots of little bits of energy here and there is enormous. But anyway, Rob's saying there, the local elections are so important. They are. Rishi Sunak doesn't seem to think so, though. Again, this may be the topic of another video. So we're getting reports. So Nadim Zahawi has been sacked, right? Now, he's not just been sacked from cabinet. He's been dismissed as the Tory party chairman. So the Conservative Party currently have no chair, right? Now, it is part of the chair's role to oversee the local election campaign. They don't really do much in terms of overseeing a general election campaign because you pay a strategist to do that. The Tory party chair will, of course, be involved in the policy committee and so on. They'll still have a role. but they don't, you know, you get. I mean, their main job is getting the tea and biscuits for the strategist that you've employed and paid a fortune to. But the Tory party chair does have a large role when it comes to local election campaigns, and the ignore rural people's heating and fuel. I'm sure lots of people do have real fires, but it's much less common in urban areas. In fact, almost non-existent. But anyway, sorry, where was I? Yes, so Rishi Sunak needs a new Tory party chair because the local elections coming up, they are incredibly important. So of course he needs a new chair. They're only a few months away. Otherwise it's going to be all a bit of a mess. And he can't get one. Or we're told he can't get one. We're told he's offered it to a few people. Now this is all speculation. It's what some correspondents are saying that they've been told, but Rishi Sunak's denying it, or Downing Street's denying it. But we're told that he has tried to get a new one and people have turned it down. Basically, it sounds like credible people for the job, prospects for the job, don't really want to get lumbered with what they think is going to be a shit show this May. Right? So, especially as they won't have a very long run. Because whoever comes in now, if he were to appoint someone today, they've got 3 months until the local election. In fact, the local election campaign, it kicks off a good 2 weeks before, really, doesn't it? So yeah, it's not ideal. So what apparently Rishi Sunak is saying to try and excuse the fact that he hasn't got a chair for the party is, yeah, we're on to it. No one's turned it down. I haven't offered it to anyone. I'm not actually in that much of a rush. You're not 3 months before the local elections, and you don't have a chair for the party, who is the main organiser for your campaign. If you're not in a rush now, when are you going to be in a rush? Yeah, in fact, Phil's saying there, talk is that candidates for chairman have turned it down. Yeah, that is what I've been reading as well. It's absolutely incredible. Because you would think, even if someone thought, look, you know, this is going to be a nightmare, thankless task, you would have thought if Rishi Sunak had any chance of maintaining his authority until next autumn, 2024 autumn, that he'd be able to find someone who would do him a solid and take the job on, even though it would be a thankless task. You know, the fact that he cannot find anyone who can have a go at it, fail, they're going to fail, but have a real go at it for him, you know, to do him a solid. The fact that he can't find anyone to do that makes you wonder how many real allies he's got, because it doesn't sound like very many. The point is, urban people will stop us being able to heat our homes. Right, nothing to do with me. But again, I'm not sure. I don't know about measures, because I don't really know much about those sort of measures. Even if Sunak goes, the Tories don't have to call a general election. The law doesn't require them to do so. Why would they? It doesn't require them to do so. They can change Prime Minister again. They can change it again the following month. They can keep change. They can do a rota system for the Prime Minister every few weeks. No problem. Legally, yes. The problem is that there comes a point where the Conservatives, and many have already done this, I just don't know how many, they'll accept that they're going to lose the next election. And given that they're going to lose the next election, it's not binary. It's not you either win or you lose. It's by how badly do you win or lose. You know, if, for example, the Conservatives lose the next election, but it's a hung parliament, so no party gets overall majority, then that's not a bad outcome for them, because Labour will struggle to govern. They will govern, they will form the next government, because other parties will go, them or the Tories will have them. But they will have to horse trade to get anything through Parliament. And their rebels will be waiting to trip them up as well. So that'll effectively reduce the size of their voting bloc anyway. So that would be a brilliant outcome for the Tories, because Labour would then find it very difficult to push ahead with a lot of reforms. If Labour gets a majority of, say, about 20, again, okay, they don't have to do so much horse trading with other parties, but they will with their own MPs, because then the rebels become quite powerful. So that is also a weak Labour government. So it's all about, can you restrict Labour to a size, a number of MPs that makes it difficult for them to govern, because they're going to be handed a very difficult task. There's no getting away from it. It doesn't matter whether Labour form the government this year or next year or even 2025. They're going to be handed a mess, an absolute mess. And if they are slowed down in tackling these issues, then if you've got people pulling in different directions, it's less likely to be effective. Like, you can have 3 solutions to a problem that are all perfectly good solutions, and they'll all work in their own different way. They've all got their own trade-offs, but they'll all sort of work in their own way. But if you can't get everyone pulling in the same direction on one solution, it's not as effective. It's like a team of players not really following the plan because some players have got a better idea and they do their own thing. Their own thing might well work if everyone else was doing the same thing. So that's the thing for the Tories. If it comes to a point where they think, you know, we're going to lose, what do we do to reduce the scale of the damage? Part of that calculation is, when do they trigger it? You know, it's when do they trigger it to reduce the number. And it can't be this year unless the rebels in the Tory party completely block Sunak from governing. It can't be this year, because the economy is too badly damaged. It will be better next year, or it will appear better anyway. Any change of PM between now and 2025 will result in a general election. In theory, yes. In practice, yes. In theory, it doesn't have to. In practice, yes, it will, because most Tories know that this is it now. The public will just, it will be incredible. You know, that yet again, people are struggling, and the government, the Tories, are just having their own little infighting. That's not going to help them win. That actually could result. I actually wonder, I know the polls keep saying lots of mad things. I actually wonder just how many MPs they could realistically lose. You know, they could end up with only 200 MPs, pretty much like Labour did after the last election. It could be a complete reversal. Sunak has dropped the R&D tax allowance as its fruits would benefit Labour. They'll get a bit more tax now, the bastards. I use that. There are a few things at the moment where I think it's quite clear that the Conservatives believe that Labour are going to form the next government, and part of what they're doing is designed to make it difficult for Labour to enact their policies afterwards. Starmer will have all the same problems as Sunak when in power, even with a large majority. He won't have all of the same problems. No. For a start, he'll have MPs behind him, as long as he gets a reasonable majority. There are different factions within Labour as well, but most of them will not want to exit government as soon as they've come in. So they will work towards a common plan. Another issue that he doesn't have that Sunak does is Brexit is no big hang up. I know that make Brexit work, we can't talk about joining the single market and all the rest of it, but there's no hang up in Labour itself about working closely with the EU. You know, Rishi Sunak tried to change the mood music a little bit by being more friendly with, like, if you think about it, Boris Johnson was very aggressively opposed to all sorts of leaders, Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland, Mark Drayford in Wales, von der Leyen, Ursula von der Leyen in the EU, just Europeans in general. Very antagonistic. Rishi Sunak has gone out of his way to say, no, my style of government is much more friendly, much more cooperative. But in reality, his policies aren't. His policies are no different. And, you know, the retained EU law bill is still hurtling through Parliament. That's coming up again. You know, European leaders have started to say, express concern at that and go, well, we're going to have to impose tariffs and things like that then, because this would be a breach of the promises that were made. And those promises were made to the British public as well. They've got no mandate for it. But Labour do not have any of those hang-ups. Labour can, as they've said they're going to, when it comes to the renegotiation of the trading cooperation agreement, they can renegotiate it so that it reduces trade barriers as much as possible. They can go in with, our aim is to use this period of renegotiation to reduce trade barriers. That is basically going to mean aligning standards, committing to aligned standards, as well as a few other things. Labour also, as they've said, can negotiate a comprehensive security agreement. The EU didn't want us to stop that. That was the Conservatives who said, no, we don't want any of your security agreements, thank you very much. But Labour don't have that hang up either. So there's an awful lot of things that Labour are constrained in some areas. They're constrained in that the public think the economy works the way the Tory press tell them it works. So they're constrained in that way. But in terms of the boring business of government, they're not. You know, the deals with the EU and others are not, they're not going to find their own MPs arguing against them. Sunak in politics was only ever for vanity, to get out of his father-in-law's shadow. I'm not sure. I don't know about that. I don't know what his motivations are, in all honesty. But whatever it is, if it was just to become Prime Minister, then, you know, job done. He can go off and make even more money after he's kicked out. Sunak's ambitious and politically naive. He's incredibly politically naive. You know, I keep saying, I mean, part of it is understandable because he has not been in politics for very long. You know, he's, I mean, I'm saying recently. Now, Starmer and Sunak both entered Parliament in 2015, both at the same time. And Starmer has been active in politics, but not really around many politicians. But Sunak, not at all. As far as I can tell, zero experience in politics until he became a candidate. His first experience in politics was becoming a candidate, and then he won. So he doesn't really know very much. You know, you look at some MPs, and before they became MPs, they may have been very active in their local party. They may have been councillors. They may have worked for MPs in their constituency office or a Westminster office. So they've been in or around politics before. Like David Cameron, for example, was an advisor to Norman Lamont. I mean, this is the same Norman Lamont that crashed the economy, so he wasn't necessarily a very good advisor, but he was nonetheless working with politicians, and quite a lot of MPs have done that before they become MPs. So Sunak doesn't actually, and it's like he hasn't even had my level of understanding of politics. He hasn't even, like, it doesn't even seem to have been a hobby for him. He just thought, oh, I could be an MP. Oh, that'd be a good idea. Oh, I might be able to become Prime Minister. Oh, that'd be nice. I can be the first non-white Prime Minister. Oh, nice one. I'll do that for a few years. Sunak suffers from, all Tories suffer from, ambition that's never matched with ability. I think it goes further than that, though. I think it's ambition for themselves, but no ambition for what they want to achieve. You know, it's like if you were to ask Rishi Sunak, in all honesty, candidly, you know, what have you achieved? He will say becoming Prime Minister. And I think that's the difference. You know, if you ask certain people, what have you achieved? And someone who doesn't really set out to achieve anything will talk about the positions that they've acquired for themselves or the rewards for themselves. Whereas if you ask someone who set out to achieve something, they'll talk about what they did with those positions, with the power and influence they acquired. If you were to ask Rishi Sunak what he's achieved, he's just basically going to say, I was the first non-white Prime Minister. Because he hasn't done anything. And I don't think he even really wanted to do anything. Do I think the next general election result will be in 1992, 97 or something different? It could be anything, couldn't it, at this point? Because I keep looking at the polls. See, I'm being pulled in two directions myself. Part of me, I'm going to get them up again. Part of me looks at them and thinks, because I've also been looking at the polls as they were in the few years leading up to 1997, for example. I've been doing that recently as well. And you look at them and it sort of was roughly where it is now, and it's sort of narrowed, but only narrowed slightly. So you look at the polling as it is now and you think it could stay like this. It could now stay like this all the way to the election. It really could, because you think to yourself, so what would allow the Conservatives to close the gap with Labour? And I cannot think of anything that they're currently trying to do that will work. I can think of policies that in theory they could adopt rather, that might work. But in terms of what they're trying to do, and what they're trying to do is very much around this 5-point plan, with a few other bangs and whistles thrown in. And I just think, no, I can't see what the Conservatives do to close the gap again. And the other side of the coin is, do Labour do anything to shit the bed? They seem very focused. In theory, a personal scandal affecting a senior member of Labour's leadership could derail them a little bit. But again, that seems unlikely, because he has gathered a leadership of incredibly dull people around him. Some of them are very effective, but none of them you would believe have so much as gone scrumping when they were young. So I don't think that they've... I can't see anything to close these polls down. But then, when it comes to the general election itself, there's probably a big pool of Conservative voters who at the moment in the polls are not represented because they're saying they don't know. And the reason they're saying they don't know is because they can't bring themselves to say they'll vote for the Conservatives, because they're looking at them and going, no. But when it comes to the election, they'll, instead of thinking, I don't approve of these Conservatives, they'll look at the situation and think, but they'll believe, the horror stories about Labour, and they'll think, but it'll be better than having Labour in, and they will hold their nose and vote Conservative. But at the same time, it's entirely possible that there's also a load of don't knows who are thinking, I don't like what Labour are doing at the moment. I don't agree with their stance on this or that or the other. But when it comes down to it, we'll think, but it will still be better than the Conservatives. So I don't know whether that will balance out or not. What a great win for Scotland in the rugby. Yeah, I saw a bit of that. It was a very interesting game, very back and forth. It's pretty much the only thing. I don't watch it all the time. I watch now almost no sport. Pretty much the only thing I do watch is rugby union, either Six Nations or the World Cup. And even then, and I don't watch every match anymore. I did catch some of the England-Scotland game. It was very good. Something the Conservatives won't do, move to the left of the Labour Party. Well, no. I mean, people say they already have. There's front bench Labour MPs taking the piss out of the Tories, because you've got people sort of on the Labour side go, oh, Labour have moved to the right of the Tories. And you've got people in the Tory party go, oh, the Tories have moved to the left of Labour. And it's all like, really? And it's all these people just don't have. It's because, you know, this left-right is a one-dimensional thing and people are on this line. I just think of it, they just look in a direction. They can't, there's no perspective. They can't see where they are. I mean, it's absolute madness to describe the current Conservative government as left-wing. But that's what they're saying. They're not just saying it's further to the left than it was when Boris Johnson was in charge, which is still debatable. They're actually saying it's actually left-wing, as in right-wing, centre, they're over there somewhere. How much of the cocktail circuit of Starmer's team done around business as Blair Brown used to great effect at detoxifying Label's brand? They sell new Label like a salt powder. Marketing incredibly important. They have been pushing a lot. They've been meeting a lot of business leaders, presenting themselves as the party of business very much, yes. They have been doing a lot of that. There's been a lot of meetings with business leaders. There's been a lot of meetings with the EU as well. You know, it sounds to me like they're going to be straight into it. If they get a majority after the next election, they're straight in. I think there'll be a load of things done straight away. And it needs to be. They do need their first 100 days mapped out. Because like I say, it's so important when you've had a change of government, particularly after a government's been in place for so many years, to come in and at 100 days say, after 100 days, we have done this. In psychology, there's a miracle question. It's designed to A, identify your idea of better or perfection, or B, how to get there. The Tories just seem to concentrate on A. They do. Well, it is all aims. That's all it is, aims, not plans. Part of it is because they don't really care about the aims. You know, again, if I go to this, I've lost it now, haven't I? I've lost the 5-point plan. But they don't actually care about that. If they cared about government debt, it wouldn't it's not just like appeared out of nowhere. Over so many years, they wouldn't have allowed it to get where it was. If they cared about inflation, why has inflation been higher, significantly higher, 40% higher than it was under Labour? You know, if they cared about the boats, so why didn't they deal with it then? Why didn't they have a processing centre in the north of France? So then if there are any people coming across in boats, it's one of two things. Either they just didn't know about the processing centre, well, you send them back, no problem. No, not breaking any international laws, you're just taking them to where you're going to process them. And if they aren't claiming asylum, they are actually trying to enter the country legally, again, you can deport them, no problem at all, not breaking any international laws. They could stop these boats overnight if they wanted to. If they cared about it, they would have done. They don't. You know, anything else? NHS waiting list. Who is it that made them go up? If they cared about that, they could deal with it. It's because they don't. The reason there's no plan is because they don't care about the aims. They just want to sound like they do. What are my thoughts on the journalism done by the New Statesman? Same as quite a lot of publications. Sometimes you read something and you go, okay, well, I either agree with it or disagree with it, but at least they're backing up their views. And then sometimes you'll read stuff, because it's a real mixed bag. Sometimes you'll read stuff and you go, right, well, this is basically an opinion piece, but it's an opinion piece where you're not offering up any evidence. So like you either agree with it or you disagree with it. You're not compelling anyone to. You're not like presenting an argument that can be challenged or agreed with. So it's just one of those. It's not a go-to publication. It pops up quite a lot, I see on Twitter things, because they do. It's one of the publications that does like a modelling of likely election results. Sometimes you've got some interesting people who publish stuff in there. But it's not a go-to thing like mine. My main go-tos tend to be The Guardian and the Financial Times as being, you can get bullshit in both of those as well. Both of them do opinion pieces and sometimes they're well written and sometimes they're not, whether you agree or disagree. But in terms of the news, they seem to be pretty much the only publications that actually want to like report the news. Right, okay, right, so let's get the last few. What do I think of the latest issues raised by the EU if our Parliament votes through the bill to remove all those regulations? Look like they will impose tariffs as a response. Well, that's what's in the agreement. That's not. I mean, although I will discuss it at some point, maybe tomorrow, maybe Monday, it's not really news because that's what the agreement said. This is what I talked about when the agreement was, well, agreed to, when the Trade and Cooperation Agreement was finalised. This was the whole point, that it works on a basis of tariff-free trade if our goods meet rules of origin and the standards sort of remain as we promised to keep them. If we diverge, and we knew we were diverging, because when Theresa May, when she was handling the withdrawal agreement, see, you had two documents. There was the withdrawal agreement, which was the legally binding treaty, and then there was the political declaration. The political declaration was, oh, we promise to do these things, but we don't legally promise to do these things. So environmental protections and workers' rights, for example, were in the withdrawal agreement. And then when Boris Johnson renegotiated it, he moved them to the political declaration. Now, the EU didn't really care about that because as far as they were concerned, if you stick to your promise, then fine. If you don't, we'll just impose tariffs, no problem. But as soon as Boris Johnson moved them, it's like people were saying, so why have you moved them then? Does that mean because you want to reduce environmental protections and workers' rights? And went, no. If anything, we want to enhance them. It's like, yeah, but if you kept them in the withdrawal agreement, you could still enhance them. It doesn't say you can't improve them. You just can't weaken them. Oh, no, it's just much tidier like this. But I'm totally not going to reduce them, promise. So now, obviously, they're trying to reduce them, having promised the public they would not. But you know, all that's happening now is that European leaders are starting to think that the UK might be serious about abolishing all these regulations, and they're now starting, if they haven't already, they're certainly talking about, and that they will be working now, that if they do now think that the UK is serious about this, they will work out what their response will be. There's no point in waiting for us to do it and then saying, right, what should our response be? The response will need to be immediate, and the response will be corrective measures to protect their market, to protect their own businesses. So that is going to mean, if they think, right, well, you've got rid of these regulations to save on costs of producing these goods, so we will put a tariff on these goods so that you don't actually save any money at all. And obviously they will err on the side of protecting their own businesses, so it might well be that the tariffs end up making those goods actually more expensive. Why have Labour's front bench been silent on Sajid Javid's call for patients to be charged for GP appointments? Should we worry that Starmer and co plan to do just that? No, not at all. You cannot play the Tories game on everything. Labour wants to push their key messages that are designed to target their key voters. That's what they're doing. Their key voters, like, these are their priorities, so we want to talk about our policies for these. Anything else just creates noise, because you haven't got voters who are particularly swing voters going around with a chart writing down all the policy promises that are made by various parties and then comparing them and things like that. They're just listening, and they can only cope with a few. So all they're doing is basically making sure that they focus the conversation whenever they get to say anything on the things that they know are appealing to their voters. Last couple then. Labour Party are now receiving large donations from multimillionaire donors. Some are ex-Tory donors such as Gareth Quarry, multimillionaire former Conservative donor. Does this concern me? As long as there's no dodgy deals as a result of it, no, it doesn't concern me. There is such a thing, and I'm not saying just because it's Labour, it should be fine, because you can have corruption in Labour as well. There is such a thing as someone who owns a business thinking that their business will do better under with a different party in government, without getting any personal like government contracts or anything like that as a result of the donation. As long as we end up being able to sort of follow the money, then it's fine. There are going to be people who go, my business will work better with a functioning government, so therefore I will help that viable government win. So it doesn't concern me in itself. As long as, because the other thing is government contracts should become much more transparently awarded anyway. What's that? Which question? Oh, I think I've just done it. Right, anyway, so there we go. We'll call it there. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. I've got to go back down to the doggies now. We're back on again next week, of course. Have a good evening. Until next time, I'll see you later.